Neither of them can end the vitriol that you are trying to pump up right now. I understand.
What have I said that's vitriolic?
What
have I said that's vitriolic?
You're saying to me that I need to take a side and say one person.
No, I'm asking you about, you're running for president, a big job, and I'm asking you about what people say out there.
You told me I would have the floor. You told me.
Well, yes, I did.
After you get
but you
your
just said, you
speech.
just suggested that I am perpetrating vitriol, and I asked you to substantiate that. What have I said today that is vitriolic?
Let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay.
And I'm going to play the rest of that for you in just a second with its full context. But Ari Melber on MSNBC just brutalizing presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who we just talked about in a recent segment, even though it seems like MAGA is also starting to panic about him being in the race because he's winning over more right-wing voters in some polls because of his conspiratorial and detached from reality views on some things. He still is such an unknown variable. And if he actually cared, as I've said so many times, about our democracy, constitution, the upholding of the things in this country that make it what it is, then he would just very simply drop out of the race and support Joe Biden and advocate on behalf of a Trump defeat. Now, the argument you're going to hear him make, and Ari Melber nicely push back against, is that Melber asking about RFK Jr.'s stance on the threat that Trump poses to democracy, that somehow that is stoking vitriol unjustly, that somehow that is just trying to throw gasoline on the flames of division, when in reality, it's a question about a fundamental, foundational element of our country, which is the continuation of our democracy. And if someone threatens that, of course, even if some people get upset by it, we should advocate against that individual and that person's movement, which is Trump. And anyone who is for our democracy should be able to unite in opposition to that figure and their movement. So we'll talk more about that after this, but just remember that RFK Jr., to justify his presence in this race, has been trying to equivocate, which is what Melber is asking him and pushing him on here, equivocate between President Joe Biden and Donald Trump and how they threaten democracy. So he's trying to say that Biden might threaten democracy more than Trump, and that's why it's okay for him to stay in this race, which is just absolutely deranged. And the things he cites, as we've gone through before, are just bonkers and dishonest. But here is this full exchange. Absolutely incredible job from Ari Melber.
People are concerned not that this is Nader 2.0, but that you are using the platform and the following you have to suggest that they're both catastrophic and they're similar, and that you, they say, are ignoring not only the policy difference, but the actual possible democracy and autocratic threat of Donald Trump if he wins again. Perhaps thanks to you, your response.
Yeah, I never said that. So, like I said, I think both of them did bad things to our country. I think both of them contributed. President Trump, more than any president in history, built $8 trillion after coming in and promising the country that he was going to run the government like a business. He shut down every business, 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. That's a violation of the Constitution. He ran up an $8 trillion debt. More money he spent than every president between George Washington and George W. Bush, 283 years. President Biden is racing to catch up with him. He's added $1 trillion in the last 100 days. They're both catastrophic. Neither of them can solve that problem. Let me tell you something else they can't do. Neither of them can end the vitriol that you are trying to pump up right.
So we're getting back to this moment, then it'll play through to a really interesting second part of this. Just while you're watching, please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button and click the like button, the alert bell, to help us continue to keep growing. And I will say, to his point, remember, whenever he points out issues, for example, the debt, just remember that when we've gone through and tried to understand it, we've done this a lot more on the bonus show. Click the join button to get the members only bonus show. But as we've watched his policy proposals, he's very passionate about some issues like censorship of social media accounts and vaccine stuff, but he's very incoherent on a lot of policy subjects. And so it's really easy, the easiest, some might say, to point to problems. Identifying and then advocating on behalf of solutions to those problems is the hard part. And so make sure you keep that in mind, where he doesn't actually have thoughtful solutions to a lot of these problems.
right now. I understand.
What have I said that's vitriolic?
What
have I said that's
what you're
vitriolic?
saying to me that I need to take a side and say one person.
No, I'm asking you about, you're running for president,
Yeah.
it's a big job, and I'm asking you about what people say out there.
You told me I would have the floor. You told me.
Yes, I did.
After you get
but you
your
just
long
you just
speech.
suggested that I am perpetrating vitriol, and I asked you to substantiate that. What have I said today that is vitriolic?
Let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I said when I announced a year ago is that we are facing a time in our history, Ari, that is more, and I think you'll agree with this, you are a student of history, that is more vitriolic, more polarized, more poisonous than at any time since the American Civil War. And it's all being amplified by the social media algorithms. And it's hard to see a way out of that if somebody doesn't come along and say, I'm not going to participate in that. And even if people act crazy on both sides, I'm not going to be part of that craziness.
But you're not addressing the question I raised, and maybe you won't, which is that what we just heard from former President Trump and what he does in the racism, in the misogyny, refusing to leave peacefully through January 6th, up through that night, praising the people who are now convicted seditious.
Because there's so much of this, let me jump in, give a little bit of my thoughts on what we've seen so far, then play the rest of it, because there's just so much that you want to see. To go through some of what he said, I will say it just seems to exude from him entitlement. That's what I get from him. The way that he talks in these interviews, he's so offended when he gets challenged. You're in a race right now where some of the most respected scholars are saying that Trump poses an existential threat to our democracy. The Economist, the publication, each year does a predictive guide, and this year said Trump is one of the greatest threats to the world, which sounds just bonkers, but because of the way he could destabilize American democracy, the authoritarian threat he poses, and because we're such a core part of the broader network of countries and the stability of the globe, a bunch could be rattled by that. So the fact that he would be so offended that people who are worried we could lose our democracy are saying, why are you in this race when you have no chance of winning, but you do have a chance of helping Trump? And people in your campaign are admitting that their top priority is helping Biden lose, even if that means Trump wins. Trump can win. We just want Biden to lose. And so don't be so entitled by the fact that, yes, you have to answer for that fact and you're woo-woo, but I'm going to unify everyone by saying absolutely nothing all the time isn't helping you get away with that rhetorically. I will say one of the lines he used in particular was, I don't want to take sides, which I'll say again, think about historically the consequential times throughout history, right? I don't like pointing to particular examples because then all people become obsessed with and responding to me is, are you comparing this moment to the blah, blah, blah era or this conflict or this thing or that? So instead, just imagine whatever you like. A really big consequential in history, right and wrong is a lot easier to identify, right? Whenever we analyze history, it's very easy usually for us to go, this was the right side of history, this was the wrong side of history. Rarely do we say, oh, I'm so happy there were people saying that they didn't want to take sides. And right now we're in one of those consequential moments where not taking a side is taking a side. It's taking the third option, which is horrible. Okay, it's not as bad as taking the anti-democracy stance, but it's also bad. And you'll notice his argument is so weak that just a little bit of pushback there caused him to crumble. I mean, he sort of struggled. And you're going to see that more as I play more. And I have more to say, but here's more.
What I played for you, people don't all see what you seem to be saying, which is a type of equivalence. Do you see something different about that and the threat of that this election or not? And if not, so be it. But that's what people are asking.
This is when I say you're feeding into the vitriol. You're trying to get me to hate on President Trump.
Not hate on. I'm talking about what happened. They stormed the Capitol. They tried to overthrow the certification and the results of a lawful election. And Donald Trump is out here now saying he has, according to his lawyers, license to kill, license to coup, will pardon all those people. And so you seem to be saying, discussing that as vitriolic. No, it's not. Having a clear position on the peaceful transfer of power is a very low bar. Very low bar. And the reason why people are asking this is not just because they're trying to distract from your issues, although you're getting time to discuss them. But again, you're well familiar with your campaign put out a statement and an email that said basically
and then it continues on the downplaying of his campaign of January 6th and some other things. So to continue going through that, right now, RFK Jr., I've been talking to people as I've been sort of documenting for you all as much as I can, getting an understanding of, especially people my age, why they're struggling to be motivated to vote for Biden, some of them. And one of the people that I talked to recently said they were interested in RFK Jr. When I asked why, they didn't know a lot about him, but they'd seen him on a bunch of the podcasts they like, and they like that he's sort of not Biden or Trump and is saying that we can unite. And so I want to speak to the unity part of this. I agree. I'd love to live in a more unified country. And the simplest way to imagine that for a lot of people is, well, what if we just sort of pick a third option, right? You got Trump and Biden. They presumably represent their respective sides. So we should just pick one in between that and then we'll be good. But unity comes from a dedication to some fundamental principles, right? We have to be able to unite as Americans around some fundamental principles. And so if those fundamental, again, foundational principles are being threatened by a candidate and their movement, then the unity needs to be among the people who still stand for those fundamental principles. And to be clear, this is Republicans and Democrats alike. There are tons of Republicans who get the threat that Trump poses. Whenever he was president last time, he tried to block the peaceful transfer of power through schemes like the fake elector scheme that he's now being prosecuted for, potentially criminal behavior and trying to prevent Biden from coming to office after he lost a free and fair election. And a lot of Republicans get that. You're hearing from Nikki Haley Republicans. Then you have independents who get it and Democrats. So this isn't about Republican or Democrat. This is about Constitution-loving, democracy-loving, America-loving people saying, even if we have policy differences, the only viable candidate that is dedicated to upholding our Constitution is Biden. So we're going to unite around him. That's the unity that you have to advocate on behalf of. And again, think back to those historic examples. Did we prevail through divided times, through saying, never mind, dangerous movements, potentially authoritarian movements? We're going to just sit back on our behinds and accept the threat that you pose. Or we're not going to take a side in the for or against what's right. That's not how we got through divided times. There is unity that's necessary. It's just, again, among people who still stand for those fundamental principles. And then you win. Eventually, that group gets bigger and you're back to a more united time. And I will say, it's true whenever he appeals to this feeling of there's extremists on both sides. That's true. I've said it so many times. There's absolutely extremism on both sides of the quote unquote political aisle. Now, what I've said also so many times is right now, when you look at either party, the Republican Party has an issue with those extremists who are out in the world getting into big, powerful positions of power like the Democratic Party doesn't experience. And a great example of that is that Biden is at the tip top of the Democratic Party power structure, right? Joe Biden. So even if you're someone who's super concerned with loud voices, admittedly, who are out there, and so it feels like they're representative in a major way of the Democratic movement because of how much noise they make and they're more extreme, and that's something you're concerned with, just remember, when it comes to positions of power, Biden's at the top of that power structure, and Biden is not an extremist. And we could go through, as we have in the past, his actual policy record on paper, his policy record. And even if you disagree with things, I think almost all Americans would have to admit, if they took an honest look at that, it's not extreme. And most Americans would be on board with most of it, like lowering prescription drug costs, investing in infrastructure, all the stuff we talked about. Whereas Trump, on the other side, does represent the extreme part of his quote unquote side. And that's why so many people on his side find him repulsive. And he's made it to the top of the Republican power structure as an extremist. And so while, yes, there's extremism on both sides, it can't be treated the same or discussed the same because on one side is actually getting into positions of power in a major way. The other side, not so much. And in politics, we should talk about people in positions of power. And then I will say, and I'll try to wrap this up on this point, again, on the point of unity, want RFK Jr. to be identified by at least my audience as someone who's furthering the division by misinforming and confusing people, because I believe in America at large and the American people at large. And so what I mean is, if it's true that unity has to come from this dedication to a common set of fundamental principles. And one of those has to be a dedication to the continuation of democracy and the opposition to authoritarianism. Most Americans believe that. So then why is this election going to be so close then? Well, it's because not enough Americans get that those are the stakes. And I know how quickly people can get it by just informing them because of that going on recently in conversations where I have just been approaching people and they go very quickly from sort of, I don't really know, I'm not motivated to vote in this election, to, oh, I'm definitely going to vote for Biden, just with a laying out of the facts. Here's what Trump tried to do last time he was president, whenever he lost but couldn't accept it. Here's what he's been promising to do in a second term. And then so many people, they have the correct values. Again, they are dedicated to our democracy. It's just explain that to them. So then RFK Jr. plays into this because he distracts people from that and confuses people and starts trying to make a case that Biden and Trump both threaten democracy. And so then a lot of good faith, great people out there are just being misinformed. And then that is actually furthering this division by preventing a bunch of Americans, the vast majority of America, who I do believe is dedicated to our democracy, from uniting around that. RFK Jr. is making it harder for us to all unite around our common dedication, despite policy differences, to our democracy and our Constitution and our opposition to authoritarianism. And so he should do some introspection on that, because he's actually doing the exact thing he's accusing others of doing. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments.